I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. Anyone with a top hat is a Mason. Well, at least when it comes to the early 1900s. I don't trust any of these people with top hats. But what is a top hat, and why was every single person during this era wearing the same exact outfit? It's something we never really questioned, but when you look into many of these old photos, everyone is wearing the same thing, especially all of these corporate hats, robber barons. They wouldn't leave their house without a top hat. But what is a top hat, and when did this all begin? When it comes to top hats, we're typically speaking of a high hat, cylinder hat, or topper, which is traditionally associated with formal wear in the West that came to rise during the end of the 18th century. On December 1st, 1941, the United States Public Health Service banned the use of mercury in the felt industry. We can trace the felt hat industry back to mid-17th century France, and it most likely was introduced into England around 1830. Since its beginning, mercury was used in the process of the creation of these hats. At first, Turkey camel hair was used for the felt material, and it was discovered that the process would be sped up if the fibers were moistened with camel urine. It is said that in France, the workmen would use their own urine to make these hats. One workman's urine worked the best for these felt hats, and everyone was so curious as to why this man's pee was so good at making felt hats. Well, this is the story that they tell us, that this worker had been treated for syphilis, and back in the day, they would just shoot up mercury to heal it, I guess, so that's how they tell the story. And this guy had mercury in his system. He was pissing on the fiber so that it would make better felt. And because the mercury was in his urine, they realized that it was the mercury that was responsible for creating the superior felt hats. This is the supposed reason that they started putting mercury in hats, for more quality hats? Well, that seems awfully strange because they were well aware of the effects of mercury poisoning, as they've been using it for medicine and alchemy for thousands of years. But the thing is, mercury poisoning would cause dementia and Mad Hatter disease, which could be characterized as delirium, hallucinations, and even suicidal tendencies. With severe cases, this would produce tremors throughout different parts of the body, including the mouth and tongue, making it difficult to speak properly. Those are in overexposure cases, but with just the right amount. These effects can be more mild and last for years without anyone noticing, producing effects such as fatigue, loss of memory, vivid dreams, and depression. So what is Mad Hatter disease? Exposure to mercury, even low levels for periods of time, can cause health problems in humans. Prolonged exposure can lead to chronic mercury poisoning. This may be called Mad Hatter disease or Mad Hatter syndrome. Mad Hatter disease causes severe neurological effects known as erethism. It can lead to symptoms like headaches, behavioral changes, and weakness. Then, during the 18th to 20th centuries, hat makers would use mercuric nitrate to stiffen felt for these hats. These hats would produce vapors in which those who wore them would not only absorb via their scalp, but would inhale in poorly ventilated areas. Over time, these hatters began having symptoms, including psychosis, excitability, and tremors throughout the body. It was so common that this is literally where the phrase, "mad as a hatter," comes from. Think about the long-lasting effects this would have, especially if the populace were not aware and it was promoted as the new fashion. I mean, everyone was wearing these back in the day. You were a nobody if you didn't have one. So was there a purpose behind this? We all know of the crazy Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland, but why does he act so crazy? During Lewis Carroll's time, mercury was being used in the process of creating top hats, and the Hatter is complete with all the characteristics of the disease. Erratic, flamboyant, and silly behavior, along with mood swings being the most obvious symptoms of mercury poisoning. Why would Lewis Carroll add this top hat reference? Is there a deeper truth to this Mad Hatter character? Which, interestingly, in the newer films is presented more like a clown with red hair or some type of demon, Nephilim, which is also interesting because people claim to be visited by spirits of a similar nature. They call them Mad Hatter demons. They are demonic entities that have white faces and wear the top hat. You can find these symbols all over the place, even in games. But where does this phenomenon originate? It's obviously a huge part of our psyche, but why? They're just top hats. Is it more than just a fashion statement? Or does it possibly represent a much darker truth? The Lewis character may have been one of the earliest characters of a Mad Hatter, but there are references from the 17th century in which a man, Robert Crabb, who was an eccentric living in Chesham, England, gave all his goods to the poor and lived on dock leaves and grass. However, Carroll may have based his Mad Hatter character on a Theophilus Cater, not a hatter, but a furniture dealer who was known locally as the Mad Hatter, partly because he always wore a top hat, was eccentric, and produced wacky inventions. This phrase from its origin was used to describe those who were crazy and prone to unpredictable behavior. Most employees would staff a variety of ailments called the Hatter Shakes, which were speech problems, emotional instability, and hallucinations. The top hat's origins go far before Alice in Wonderland, as these were most likely inspired by capitaines, which is a tall crowned hat from the late 1500s in northwestern Europe worn by elites and their orphans. This is also known as the pilgrim hat. Why is it that all these pilgrims had top hats? It is said that they never really had a buckle on them, and even if they did, the buckle really didn't do anything. It's most likely a symbol or a reference. They actually didn't wear any buckles at all. So why is that in all these cartoons and depictions of pilgrims? Are they wearing a buckle? Perhaps it's a secret gesture? So these early capitaines inspired the crowned dark felt hats with wide brims that bursted in popularity during the leisure wear fashion during the 1770s age of revolution. In the 1780s, there came the justaucorps, which were what the royal elite wore and the origin of the three-piece suit, or what we call a business suit. These were then made for the capitaines, or captains, who would wear these capotaines, which had many designs, but were most likely still using mercury for the stiffening process. There are the tricorn and bicorn hats, which were worn by many generals and top leading officials during the Napoleonic period. By the 1790s, this elite dress wear was turned into fashion city wear for the upper and middle classes throughout the entire Western world. This was not some accident of culture in which these styles emerged from pure creativity. No, it was a purposeful design, a uniform, and this uniform was to serve a specific purpose. There were some variations. Around the 19th century, there were beaver hats, then black and gray silk. Think about this compared to other cultures that were so colorful, vibrant, and creative with their fashion. There's a reason we get these dull colors, straight edges, box-style fashion. It produces a certain culture, a specific type of consciousness. The dress coats were replaced by frock coats in the 1840s to become the conventional former outfit, and they would wear it on a daily basis. The top hats would be combined with a frock coat and white tie. This would be their identity, their representation, and anyone who did not conform was not a part of the club. You guys remember that episode of The Fairly OddParents where everyone was a gray blob? Well, it seems that's really what it was like back then. You may think it's a joke, but literally everyone was wearing these. Danbury, Connecticut has always been known as the Hat City. It was the hat-making capital of the world until the 19th century. At the peak of the industry, 5 million hats a year were produced in 56 different factories in Danbury. Why were they producing so many hats? These hats were literally causing the conditions known as the Danbury Shakes, which turned the populace into Mad Hatters. It is even said that this resembled drunkenness and that employers would exploit this condition. Now this is just insane. The seal of the city of Dansbury during this period was literally a phoenix being burned within a crown, and on the shield we have a top hat, the ruins of a chimney, and a red banner that reads Restituimus in Latin. which means to restore or replace. Why would they be putting these top hats on a coat of arms or a city seal with a burning phoenix? Also, strangely, researchers have suggested that Boston Corbett, the man who killed John Wilkes Booth, President Abraham Lincoln's assassin, might have suffered from poor health due to mercury poisoning. He apparently castrated himself as well with a pair of scissors. So wait, they weren't smart enough to notice that these hats were causing literal insanity, yet they were making them for several centuries? They didn't stop using mercury in hats until 1941, and it's been that way since the 17th century. They knew it was dangerous business, but that would mean that they did this on purpose. Think about it. We all know of the old world asylums. What if there's something more to this story of these top hats? Were the governments at this time knowingly drugging the populace slowly to cause delirium? This in turn would allow people to be more malleable, to stop people from asking too many questions, even give the government a valid excuse to imprison people in these asylums. But more so, it would allow lower level masons, the inventors, businessmen, and other contributors to society to be more easily controlled. Perhaps a way to control the influencers of that age. Furthermore, hats are deeply rooted in the art of secret gestures, or the means in which one can secretly signal that they are part of a hidden group or society. This is the history of the Phrygian caps, also the red hats that are visible in Renaissance art. These were not only used to signify someone's allegiance, but also a means in which minds could be controlled. If you wore the top hat, you were a part of Masonic society. You were a respectable man of industry. Yet, perhaps this explains why much of the populace did not question the directive of their higher-ups, including the history that they were given. This would turn the entire city or country into an insane asylum on a larger scale. An innovative idea for creating compliance without the populace even realizing it. Think about how this is transferred into the modern day. Sure, it's not done through hats anymore. I mean, it could be, but more so through the sky, our water supply, our food, and even what we watch on the television. It's all a means to make us so insane that we cannot see the insanity of the world we live in. Of course, they present this history with cases that highlight mercury poisoning and insanity to its extreme forms, but it's not typically brought up what were the underlying subtle effects from these top hats on the population as a whole. In many old photos and engravings, you find that almost everyone was wearing these top hats. So, are there symptoms that were not as obvious as the ones that are typically represented as Mad Hatters, as with Alice in Wonderland? Perhaps it wasn't always such extreme measures, but instead, it was a slow process of being medicated. Not everyone reacted the same way either, and not everyone went completely insane. However, it is possible that this may have had an effect on one's thinking and their ability to question the established narrative. So yeah, I don't trust anyone with a top hat, especially if we look back in history. These were the Masons that came in and repopulated many of these cities. This was part of their uniform, not the top royal level, but big players for sure. And it was a means in which they would be able to be more malleable and controlled by their new societal norms of rising industry and production. Am I just mad as a hatter? Or is there perhaps something more to this story of the top hats? Well, it gets even more interesting. So the question is, did the elite or top authorities of the time know of the neurotoxic effects of mercury? Because if so, then that would mean there was a purpose other than fashion behind these uniforms or fashionable top hats. Well, mercury causes Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, and depression. If people were going mad just because of working conditions and the products they used, then why would they be administering mercury-based medicine since the 1700s? Well, the blue mass was a blue pill, which was a very common remedy for several illnesses such as syphilis, tuberculosis, constipation, parasites, and even as a pain medicine. Now obviously this is the story of how they did it back then. Literally, they would stick a syringe in their urethra and inject mercury. No joke, that's what the pirates like Blackbeard did. Even a cluster pump to deliver medical mercury enemas for quicker absorption. The story is that they just didn't know they were poisoning themselves. Because keep in mind, the blue mass pill has a lot of mercury. Apparently, a typical daily dose of 2 pills would be 100 times the modern daily limit set by the Environmental Protection Agency in the US. So, if they were taking this basically for any illness, as a one cure-all method, which mercury is an antiparasitic, antiseptic, and has several other healing properties, being used for over 3,000 years, but when given on a daily basis, or perhaps as some type of soma, or remedy for any sickness. But then you can imagine as they started to fill up these repopulated cities with poor and filthy habits, such as emptying chamber pots into the streets and no solid waste management, that over time, they would need to use this type of method of healing constantly and on a daily basis. At some point, the elite would have noticed the mental side effects and the long-term effects of heavy metal toxicity. So, then these pills would be used as a matrix drug, a way to keep people from thinking too much, a way of forgetting about higher realms and being locked into material reality, while at the same time dumbing our intelligence and ability to be curious of the realm we live in. We know these pills were used in London. The Edinburgh New Dispensatory, 1789, instructs the making as follows: Pilula ex hydrogyro, London, quicksilver pills. Take a purified quicksilver, extract of licorice, having the consistence of honey of each 2 drams, licorice, finely powdered, 1 dram. Rub the quicksilver with this extract of licorice until the globules disappear. Then, add the licorice powder. Mix them together. End of instructions. So this seems to have been a very popular pill. Oh, and Abraham Lincoln even took these blue mass pills for treatment of chronic melancholia. It was reported that during this time, Lincoln experienced neurological symptoms, insomnia, tremor, and rage attacks, which suggests that he was suffering from mercury poisoning. He then realized something was up with these blue pills a few months after his inauguration and stopped taking them, and his symptoms disappeared, replaced by the patience that would mark his presidency, or at least that's what they say. Okay, or maybe it was time for him to wake up from the Matrix to implement a greater plan. Apparently, Lincoln was taking a dose of mercury on a daily basis that was 9,000 times over the safety standard today. Also, Blue Mass, which is the name of the pill, is a Roman Catholic Mass celebrated in the United States since the 1930s. So is this some type of mass religious mental software that needs to be controlled through the subtle medication of the populace through a perceived miracle medicine said to cure all? Or was it doing the opposite? And if they knew of the effects of mercury poisoning, then why would you continue to use this method in the making of TopHats, knowing full well that there were health concerns? Was this a procedure in which the masses were given uniforms and secretly drugged at the same time? Not only that, but all who took the pill were a part of the club, the culture, for this was the new norm. If you didn't have a top hat or take your medicine, there was something severely wrong with you. You're the weird one for not taking your meds. Where have we heard that before? It's not like this was never thought of in the past. Well, like I said, I don't trust anyone with a top hat, and you shouldn't either. Otherwise, you'll become a part of the mass or masses. You may go insane, and you may be unknowingly a part of a higher occult system. Stay weird, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Why was everyone constantly wearing these suits as uniforms? Even on the beach? When hiking? It was almost as if they had no other clothes, which is very strange. Grooming everyone to become a professional, a businessman, an elite, a groomed influencer, controller. Anyways, I'm gonna say no to the blue pill, and so should you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and all we can hope is that our minds may be unveiled.
Let go of everything you think to be true. Relax the mind and ask the question, do I truly understand what this reality is?